Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another exciting session of hashtag Gather to Grow here on Twitter Spaces with Food from Zanzi. I am so excited to be here. I am so happy to be able to talk on this topic and also have my speakers join me. I think by far this has been like the longest build up that I've had for a Gather to Grow session because I connected with Tam, I think a few months ago already. And I said, what is the ideal time to talk about bananas? And he said during this time. And so it's finally here. And I'm so happy to have him and my other experts joining me to talk about the basics of bananas. For those that might not know me, I'm Donumdu. I'm your host for this evening. I'm with you once a week to share information on most farming commodities, aspects of agriculture that we need to understand better, and basically just coming together to share information and share information specifically for new and developing farmers and farmers who are just in that space to kind of push to commercial level as well. Some of the content is catered for them too. But tonight we're really going back to the basics, and it's about the basics of bananas. As you guys know, I usually start with an introduction, them telling me a little bit more about what they do in agriculture, where their journey started. And it's always exciting to kind of listen to people's stories about where it all began and where they are now and where they're going in the future. So I'm going to start with the first person I met when I connected and spoke about this topic. That is Tam Johnson. As I know him, he is connected to me through one of Food from Zanzi's co-founders, Cobus Lawrence. And it's so great to have him with us. Tam, welcome. Tell us more about who you are, what you do in agriculture, and just a bit about you. Thanks.
Hi, Dawn. Thank you for having us this evening. My name's Tam Johnson. I grew up in the Zanin area. I went to Tuks to study animal science. And from there, I moved to Tanzania for 3 years to develop dairy farms and train staff on basic dairy practices. And then about a year ago, I joined Deroy Laboratories team, where I am now, and I'm the sales and technical manager at Deroy. That's how I've got into bananas and enjoying it. It's a great industry. I'm still learning a lot as I go. It's really a great industry to be in.
Thanks, Tam. And it's such a pleasure to have you join us and share your knowledge on this specific topic. But I think we'll definitely welcome you back to talk about other aspects of agriculture as well, hopefully in the future. And I'm looking forward to just, chatting to you tonight about this specific commodity and just picking your brain some more. My next guest is Connie Fraser. Connie is a banana technical consultant. Connie, thank you so much for being here and for joining us. It's such a pleasure to have you with me. And I always love to have a woman as part of my speaker list because I think we just have a different perspective on most things, as kiss to all the men in this space. But thanks, Connie, for being here and for joining me. More about you and what you do within agriculture. Thanks.
Hi, Dawn. Thank you very much for having us. My story started many years ago. As an 18-year, I started at Department of Agriculture. And then we changed to Agricultural Research Council in 94. And I was, involved in a lot of research of different crops, tea, granadellas, herbs and spices. But then many years ago, I really gone into bananas together with Dr. John Robinson. And between 20 and 30 years, I really just gone bananas. I love the crop and I've got a passion for the crop. And the last few years, I'm just like a private consultant, giving training wherever it's needed, from really back to basic and up to the harvesting and packing of the bananas.
Absolutely amazing. I think it's so vital that you kind of always get someone talking from a research perspective as well, because there's so much that happens in that space, and kind of bringing that together is also very important for, farmers on the ground to kind of understand a lot of what researchers do within the space. So thank you so much for being here. And then my last guest is Brian. Brian, it is such a pleasure to have you join me as well. Banana manager at the Chase Farm. Really great to have you with me. I saw this beautiful picture of you holding on to like a lot of bananas, which looks so beautiful. And I was like, yeah, that's so awesome. Just a bit about you, where you're based, where you farm, more about your background in agriculture. Thanks.
Hello, Dawn. Nice to be with you guys. So as you know, my name is Brian Korf and I farm in the Shawi district. That's in the north coast of KwaZulu-Natal, Zululand as they call it. We farm with about 92 hectares of bananas. I started farming when I completed my grade 12, which was in 1991. Then I went to the army, like everyone of my age, and I started farming on this farm in 1996, and I'm still here. We see Connie and Tam quite a lot because we also make use of their expertise.
Absolutely amazing. That's an entire lifetime. Since 1996. A real pleasure to have you here with your experience and your knowledge within the industry and specifically on bananas. So thank you so much. So those are my three guests. They've introduced themselves. It's a real pleasure to have them here. I think I'm going to start with Tam. Maybe you can give us a bit of an overview of the banana industry within South Africa. And obviously, as you guys know, any of the other speakers is also welcome to contribute or share some of their lived experience too within this industry. But I think it's always good to start with like, okay, what does the industry actually look like? So thanks, Tam.
Commercial planting of bananas started in around the 1920s in South Africa. There's currently about 9,000 hectares plus minus of bananas in South Africa. Farm sizes range from 5 to 500 hectares and yields vary from 20 to 65 tons per hectare per annum. The industry has seen substantial fluctuations in hectarage and levels of profitability over the last few years due to challenges in pests and diseases, input and labor costs, and the current inputs. I'm sure you're well aware of the price of fertilizer going up, and the price that the farmer gets back on his farm for bananas hasn't really changed. All bananas produced in South Africa are for the local market and for local consumption. Some of the bananas are exported to our neighboring countries, but due to our cold conditions of the subtropics, the yellow color of our bananas in South Africa is not bright enough for the European market. This is also known as underpeel discoloration. I'm not sure if Connie also has anything to add, being in the industry for much longer than what I have been.
Thanks, Tam. Thanks for that overview. I think both of them would definitely be able to kind of give their take on it, specifically, how they've seen it changing over the years. Connie, your take?
It's definitely, there's been a few changes over the years and with a lot of challenges. But lately, it's mainly because of a lot of imports from neighboring countries, and that's flooding the markets. And then also, Tam has already mentioned pests and diseases. That is really a challenge. Pests that we didn't have in South Africa that we have now. But we will also later on discuss it in other questions as well.
Thanks, Connie. Just to get Brian's take on it as well, just as a farmer producer, primary producer that has been, with this commodity for a long time. Any specific comments that you want to share in terms of the overview and how you've seen the industry changing?
I've got nothing more to add than Tam and Connie has already said. My main thing is the imports from neighboring countries. That is the high input costs to produce it, and then obviously the high imports from other countries, because bananas are very volume sensitive.
Thanks, Brian. Maybe you can actually stay with me and answer my next question in terms of, what is the ideal climatic conditions for banana farming in Mzansi? And in which areas does it thrive specifically?
Yeah, bananas are tropical plants. And as you know, South Africa is most is subtropical conditions. Because they're tropics, they like hot and humid conditions. That's temperatures between 22 and 31 degrees. But the optimal is about 27. These plants don't do well in cold regions where the average temperature is below 14 degrees. The plants will stop growing and will only continue as it gets warmer again. Bananas don't do well in regions that get frost, as frost will actually kill the plant. Bananas like well-drained soils, which is rich in organic matter, that drains well. Sandy loam and loamy soils are ideal as they have good water holding capacity as well as good drainage. The soil pH, they'll grow anything between 5.8 and 6.5 for optimal growth. Many of the ideal areas, unfortunately, in Mzansi can be very windy, and wind is not ideal for bananas as it shreds the leaves, reducing its ability to photosynthesize. So if you farm in a windy area, you've got to have the added cost of windbreaks to sort of filter the wind and protect your bananas. So most banana growing areas in Mzansi is Tzaneen, Levubu, Kiepersol, Komatipoort, Onderberg, North Coast where we are, and the South Coast of KwaZulu-Natal.
Thanks so much, and already giving us some, vital tips there when it comes to climatic conditions. And I maybe want to, if we have time, talk about, how it's changed specifically with climate change and all these variations that we're going through at the moment in terms of, weather patterns. And so I think if we do have time, we can maybe touch on that later. But I want to bring Connie into the conversation just to talk about which, banana varieties are most commonly grown in South Africa, and what do we kind of pick up when we go into the store and eat? What is that exactly? Connie, if you could just give us some background on that. Thanks.
Most of the bananas that we eat or that you guys buy at the supermarkets, they all belonging to the subgroup that we call Cavendish. They're all the dessert banana or the sweet bananas. In some other countries, you will hear they talk about plantains and cooking bananas, and that is not being grown commercially in South Africa due to that we are more a subtropical country. The Cavendish is a natural triploid, and that just means that it has a set of chromosomes that make the plant infertile. Therefore, the only way to propagate bananas in the old times used to be sucker material, and I will just discuss with you why that is important, not using suckers anymore, because it's very risky. You can spread diseases and viruses through that. And so the safer way is the way that De Roy is also now making plants, is through tissue culture planting material. The main variety that is grown in South Africa is it's called Williams. It's quite a tall variety. In the past, there was areas that used to grow the dwarf Cavendish, but it's got its challenges with the cold. You get that the bunches get stuck in the neck and other challenges with the shorter varieties. There is, out of these varieties, there's also the taller one that we call Grand Nain, and there are a few other varieties that used to be grown in South Africa, but currently it's mainly Williams, Grand Nain, and then the superior selections that De Roy has made over many, many years. That's a sort of intermediate size plants or shorter plants, and it all depends on your area and where you want to plant it to make the final selection. But I would suggest that you make use of the specialist to make the final selection if you do want to plant, so that we can determine which area you are. And maybe we must ask Tam to talk about the new variety coming from Taiwan, the Formosana. I think that'll be good if he can talk about that.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Connie. Tam, would you like to add on that? I know absolutely nothing about growing bananas, but does one plant a tree from the start? If you can just give us like the really basics for someone that knows absolutely nothing about it. Thanks, Tam.
So De Roy have secured the rights to supply a variety of banana called the Formosana. It's a new variety that we've introduced to South Africa. It was developed by Taiwan Banana Research Institute and is also known as the GCTCV218. This variety exhibits tolerance to Fusarium wilt tropical race 4 disease, which poses the most significant threat to bananas globally. TL4 has the potential to devastate banana crops as we know them. Thanks to the Formosana, farmers in regions affected by TL4 can continue with their banana cultivation with proper management. Trials are currently underway in South Africa to assess the performance of Formosana in subtropical climates and the effectiveness for farmers to deal with Fusarium wilt subtropical race 4, which is STL4, which is a different disease to TL4. As of now, South Africa is free from TL4, but obviously faces the threats of STL4, making Formosana a potentially good solution for the industry. Planting of banana plants. So as Connie was saying, in the past, people used to plant with sucker material, but it poses a lot of risks that you can spread diseases and viruses from one plantation to the next plantation. And also, even planting suckers in your own farm, you can spread diseases from one field within your farm to the next field. Through tissue culture, we're able to have mother blocks that are disease and virus free. So we test our material that we collect from our fields before we initiate it into our lab. So what we do is we collect suckers, we cut them up to the growth points, and then we put them in a multiplication media to multiply those growth points out. We'll do this for 4 multiplications, and then we'll put them to a rooting media. We then supply the market either a rooted in vitro plant, an in vivo plant, or a 20 centimeter field-ready plant. The rooted in vitro plants, we generally send for export, as those plants have obviously come directly out of our lab and have been in optimal conditions for their growth, which is our sterile conditions, optimal temperatures, humidity, etc. So when we take those plants out of the tubs that they are grown in, we put them into a specialized greenhouse with controlled temperature, irrigation, humidity, etc. And for those plants to obviously be weaned from those ideal conditions so that we can start hardening them off. After 8 weeks, those plants are then in vivo, which is a 5 centimeter plant. Those plants are generally moved within Africa as well as to generally the KZN region, where other nurseries will grow them out for the farmers. Those 5 centimeter plants are grown for another 2 months under shade netting until they reach a size of 20 centimeters. At 20 centimeters, the plants are ready to be planted, and you'll take obviously those plants in their bags to the field. There's different methods of planting. You've got tram lines, you've got just normal lines that you can plant them in. And then the farmer will obviously plant them in their fields, and they'll start growing in the field until the first harvest comes.
Thanks, Tam. I think that paints a really clear picture. If we can just talk about, average yield per hectare when it comes to banana farming, and then also just in terms of like growing on a small scale, is that viable? Or what does the kind of landscape look like in terms of like smallholder, developing, communal farmers, even to like, is there a big gap? And then commercial producers. Maybe Brian, you can touch on that a little bit with your experience, and maybe Connie also. Thanks.
The average yield of banana farm in South Africa is roughly about 40 tons per hectare. And the bunch and weight cycle is much dependent on temperature. All other factors like fertilizer, water, soil type do play a role, but heat units is the major factor. So in warmer areas, the bunches are a little bit smaller, but their cycle time. Now, cycle time is what we call when you harvest, from when they throw the bunch to when you harvest it. That's what we in the industry call cycle time. And in the cooler areas, the cycle time is obviously slower, but then your bunch is slightly heavier. This variation in bunch weight and cycle times can be seen in South Africa, but the year-to-year average tons per hectare between the different regions is very similar. So in the warm areas, you might have small bunches, but you'll have more of them. When it's a bit cooler, you'll have less bunches, but they'll be a lot larger. Yeah, when it comes to commercially viable, that's the same question you ask is how long is a piece of string? It depends on what you want to do with it. If you want to just do it for recreation, or if you've got a couple of hectares on your property that needs filling, then 5 hectares might be enough for you. But if you have got a big area and the conditions are good, then maybe 100 hectares is good enough for you. But one thing that one must remember is that the management, whether you've got 1 hectare, 10 hectares or 100 hectares, is exactly the same. So now you've got to look at, can you afford to have a person do a certain amount of work for 1 hectare? You can't have a manager on 1 hectare, but 40 hectares might afford a manager. For the small-scale growers, it would possibly be better to have smaller plots and then combine them, which brings your overall cost down, and then you can afford it brings your cost down and you can afford somebody to look after them, if you understand what I'm trying to say.
Thanks, Brian, for that. Connie, I saw you unmuted your mic. Just another point, I think this is an interactive space, so a lot of our speakers are also able to contribute by asking questions. Someone who has commented, Mokeko, thank you so much for your comment. Mokeko is asking, what is the correct method for storage and handling of bananas? Thank you so much for your question. Whoever wants to take that one can just respond to it.
The handling of bananas, I assume it's ripe bananas. So ripe bananas, obviously in a cool area. If it's ripe in a cool area, don't put them in the fridge because they'll go black. And then obviously bananas are very sensitive. That you would think that the skin is green and hard, but the slightest little bump makes a mark. And if you are commercially selling them a market or to a retailer, marks is what will determine your price and whether the guys would buy them. Needless to say, the marks are only on the skin. It's not on the inside of the banana. And society or economics have sort of taught us that something needs to be beautiful for it to be good. But once the peel is off, you won't know whether it had marks on or not. That's just my little 5 cents that I throw in.
Yeah, for sure, Brian. I think it's one of the cleanest fruits you can eat because you have the skin on. So that's really cool. You just open it up and you have it. It's like the easiest fruit to eat. Connie, your comments?
I just wanted to make it clear for the people who doesn't know a banana at all. But the two parameters that's very important for banana yield will be then the weight of your bunch. And like Brian has also explained, the cycle time from harvesting of the one plant to the harvesting of the next. Because I think a lot of people don't realize you actually just harvest one bunch from one plant. But then you have selected one of the, we call it the daughter plants or the suckers that's coming up. And that will be your next bunch. So what we are saying is that the two things that plays a role in tons per hectare or yield will be then your bunch size and the cycle time from harvesting of the one bunch to harvesting of the next. I just wanted to clarify that.
Thanks for that clarity, Connie. I want to ask about how long it takes for the banana plant to start bearing fruit. If you can just give me like a timeline for that, please. Brian or Connie, Tam?
Depends on the area where you plant, as well as the month of planting. That will also influence it a lot, because South Africa being a subtropical country, we have the challenge of the winter. Depending on when you plant, it will influence. So from planting to harvest of your first crop, it can be anything from 12 months to 14 months, and even as long as 15 to 16 months, depending on when you plant. If you plant just before winter, then the possibility is that you're only going to harvest that plant's fruit, you're only going to harvest it over 2 winters. So that makes it the cycle longer. But then after that, remember, we have now selected the next, then it sort of averages it out every 10 to 12 months, depending on in which area you are and when you have planted.
Thanks, Connie. Any other comments from Tam?
Yeah, I just want to add on to what Connie said there. Obviously, with the bananas, it's not like a tree where the fruit is bared on the same tree every year. From the first harvest, the plant starts producing suckers, which are then sort of the leaders of the next plant that comes through that's going to produce a bunch. Every time the plant produces a bunch, that plant is cut back and sort of, let's say, killed, and the sucker then replaces it. And your sucker selection, as Connie was mentioning, is very important in the cycle time, as we've been talking about the cycle times, from one harvest to the next harvest. If your sucker selection is delayed, your harvest of the bananas will also be delayed, which could then skew your harvestings to longer than, as Connie said, we call it the Ratoon 1, 2, 3 is your suckers, which would then cause your harvest to go from 10 to 12 months to even longer than that. And then something else worth mentioning as well is those figures are for your Williams and Grand Nain varieties. There's also elite selections, as we were talking earlier, that have been selected by Leroy, that also are able to give bunches much quicker than those 12 to 14 months that we've developed over time.
Thanks, Tam. Just in terms of, other factors, in terms of, I think we spoke briefly about the climatic conditions, and I'm not sure if it answers this question, because where's the best space or suitable site for banana cultivation? I think that's more or less the same question as I asked earlier. But if you can just recap it for those that may have missed it, and then with that question also, just in terms of the recommended practices for irrigation and water management in banana farming. And then I can just add one more to it, is also in terms of, is it very labor intensive? What are some of the practices that you kind of have to do along the way? Those are 3 questions. Maybe I can get each of our speakers to take one of it. Brian, I can kick off with you. Thanks.
Yeah, bananas are very labor intensive. They are like little babies. They require attention all of the time. You've got to manage how many suckers, or as we call them, babies, it makes. You've got to make sure that they go in the right direction. You've got to make sure that the old leaves are cut off, otherwise they scratch the bunches. They're also very thirsty. So just to touch a bit on the irrigation, like I said, they're very thirsty. Bananas require about 1,500 to 2,000 mils of water per year. And it's always very important to remember the phrase little but often. Banana plants do well when irrigated little but often. And for the ease of management, should be watered 3 times a week during the peak season. That means November, December, January, February. A good source of water is needed nearby by either a river, a dam, or a strong borehole. On our farm, we've got 4 dams which we irrigate out of. To calculate the amount of water that is needed per week, one can take the average rainfall for each area and divide it by half. The reason why we divide the rainfall by half is that only half will reach the plant and the other half will be lost in the way of runoff or deep percolation. The same applies for irrigation water. So a grower will require an irrigation that have in a dry area with 3,000 mils of water per year. So for instance, if you are farming in an area that the average receives 600 mils per year, you divided that by 2, and that gives you only 300 mils of available water. When you subtract the requirement of the plant, which is 3,000 by the 300, you get 2,700. And that's how much water you will need to irrigate per year to get a successful crop. When you divide this 2,700 millimeters by the 52 weeks in a year, you get 50 millimeter per week over 3 cycles. That is, cycle means irrigation time. Every time you irrigate in a week, which is 17 millimeters per cycle. So the farmers then obviously have to take rain into consideration when irrigating and skipping irrigations according after it's rained. Now, climate change, what I've seen with climate change is that we have longer periods of drier time, which means you need to irrigate. And then you have these huge violent storms, which still gives you the same amount of water per year, but you probably lose a lot more than half. So bananas is not easy to grow.
Thanks, Brian. And we have another question here from one of our listeners. Kaviraj Sumara is asking, can you describe the different granular fertilizers used to supply micronutrients and micronutrients, as well as their quantities and frequency of application? That was part of my next questions coming up, but if one of you could just respond to Kaviraj, I hope I'm saying your name right. Please forgive me if I'm not. Connie, I see you've unmuted your mic. Thanks.
Yeah, bananas, it can be grown in a wide range of soils, but what's very important is that the soils must be fertile and very well drained. Now, it is actually an easy crop when it comes to fertilizer. It just needs its normal NP and K, and it's got a high demand for nitrogen. And nitrogen is normally, like we all know, it's helping the plant with the plant growth. And then the one that's very important for banana is potassium. And then depending on the soil type, they do need a little bit of phosphates, but we normally just apply that at planting. Calcium can be applied before planting, even just rectified once a year, with dolomitic lime or gypsum, depending on the pH and your soil types. Bananas cannot plant nitrogen, and we already discussed the irrigation, that the plants needs a little often concept for irrigation. Now, the same is for the fertilizer. As you can think for yourself, we have described that the plant, you have this various stages in a banana plantation. There's got plants that needs to be grown vegetatively, and you need fertilizer for plants that's flowering, and others already got a bunch. So the little and often concept just give the correct amount of nutrients that the plant need when the plant need it, and it must be available in the ground. Like I said, potassium is the most important element, and that will ensure that you do large bunches and many hands on the bunches with long fingers. Potassium is also very important when we look at the fruit quality and the shelf life of the bananas. That is the main macro elements. The micro elements that is mostly important, the two that is the most important is zinc and boron. But all of this can be rectified during with a very well recommended fertilizer program. What is very important, even before you start growing bananas and you start with your soil preparation, that you take soil samples and have it analyzed so that the specialist can give you the correct recommendation for the soil amendments, as well as help you then with the fertilizer program for the growing season. And I'm just going to discuss N, P, and K because that is the 3 most important. N is around 260 to 280 kilograms per hectare per year or per annum. And potassium is 500 to 800 kilograms per hectare per year. And phosphate is 50 to around 150. But it is very important that you just not go and apply these, amounts. Rather have the soil analyzed and then the recommendation done by a soil specialist.
Thanks, Connie. Great insights. And of course, this conversation is a start. You're more than welcome to connect with any of our speakers by Twitter, or you can reach out to me as well after the session if you'd like more advice, if you'd like more clarity on your specific questions. This space is specifically so that we can connect people to others and see how we, basically learn from each other and grow together within the industry. I have another question from Duncan Masiwa. Duncan is saying that he's not sure if this question has been answered. I think Brian touched on it briefly, but Duncan is asked, how is climate change impacting banana cultivation in South Africa, in South Africa's growing regions, and are farmers witnessing changes, and how are they adapting their farm management practices because of it? So I think, Brian, you briefly touched on this. If you want to maybe just take it again or just share some of your insights from earlier, and then if Thomas or Connie wants to comment on that, then for sure, you're more than welcome. Thanks, Brian.
We have specifically in our area, we have higher temperatures in summer. We have longer periods where we rely on irrigation and not so much on rain. So that is the two factors. And then we have these huge storms that go with it that normally bring, fortunately, we're not in a hail belt because hail and most crops don't go well together. But we have these windstorms, and like we've said earlier, that wind is a problem. It shreds your leaves and they can't photosynthesize, which means now, obviously, you'll have a smaller bunch. So what we try and do is we can't do anything about the wind or the storms. So what we do is we see our water as a very important source. So what we do is we try and use it optimally. So we have probes in every field that measure the total available water, which then we only irrigate when we have to. And when conditions are optimal, like if it's very hot, we'll irrigate at night because there's no evaporation at night and it gives for better penetration of your water. We also try not to irrigate when it's windy because it just blows your water away. And then we also, a lot of guys fertigate, who has a lot of fertilizer volatilizes or gets lost if they get in contact with the sun. And a lot of guys also automate their irrigation. There's systems available. We have got another 4 years to go before our system is fully automated, where we can literally irrigate every single field what it needs. What I mean with this is normally on the top of a hill, it'll get drier first, then the middle of the hill, and then the foot of the hill. So the foot of the hill doesn't need as much water as the top. So you have a probe that tells your pump that, listen, it doesn't need water now, but the top needs water. And it's just doing things more effectively and using as little water as possible for maximum result. Connie, Tam, you're more than welcome to add anything there.
Yeah, I think climate change globally is obviously having a big effect with the increase in temperatures. Some places are getting drier, whilst other places are getting wetter, which is sometimes favorable for banana crop farming. Especially what the experts are saying is Central Africa will see an improvement in yields in bananas because they'll have an increase in temperature and rainfall, which will be favorable for banana growth. In South Africa, as Brian is saying, what he's seeing is having longer dry periods and then a lot of rain coming down. If you're having that massive amount of rain come down, that water isn't getting to the bananas like it would if you had a more even rainfall over the rainy season. Most of that rain will be just running off and not utilized by the bananas. So even though you're getting the same amount of rainfall in the year, less of that water is utilized by the bananas. If obviously you've got that water, you're able to capture that water, you can then use that water to irrigate the plants again. But if areas are getting drier and have less water, ways to sort of mitigate the climate change and those warmer temperatures, less water, would be one, to increase your planting density so that there's more shade coverage in your plantation so that you have less evaporation. And then two, although we like using micro sprinklers underneath the plants to create a microclimate within the canopy, underneath the canopy of the plants, people may start having to move towards drip irrigation rather than micro sprinklers, just so that less water again is evaporated and it's more directed into the soils.
Thanks, Tam. Connie?
I just quickly want to mention two phenomena that we already experienced that have changed for Duncan. There's a phenomena that we call November dump. That means that if the flower initiation of the banana plants took place during a very cold period, and normally that will be in July, then the flowers will emerge in November and the farmers will harvest fruit in January and February that is misformed, even though, it was growing through the summer months. What we have found now that we even in the past, normally we will get this fruit in January, February, but we have experienced that this is already moved to March, April already. That is the one thing. And the other one is that we call under peel discoloration, and you might see it now when you buy fruit in the supermarket. It's got a dull yellow color. It's not a nice bright color. And if you see the fruit when it's green, it will have a dull green color and not a nice bright green. And that is due to the cold winter months. We even seen that it will take, this fruit is now longer on the shelves than it was in the past.
Yeah, that's very tricky. The consumer wants what the consumer wants. So if it doesn't look like it normally does, it's always a challenge. And this is always something that we come across when we talk about all commodities. It's not just bananas. It's so interesting when we talk about this. I want to talk about how specifically new developing farmers in South Africa can access markets for their banana produce. Where should they go to? What does it look like? Is it viable for someone who wants to diversify and corner off one small piece of their land to start this? Is it something that they can do? And what would you advise? Tam, your take on it?
I would say there's about two markets really realistically that people can supply to. There's obviously the national markets, which has to be done through an agent. But the smaller farmer that's starting out can also look at the option of bakkie trade, which is a huge market that has huge potential for the small-scale farmers. And really all they need is a small pack house that they can pack the fruit into crates. And then what they generally do is sell it to someone that comes and collects it in their bakkie. And they will take it to maybe a larger operation that has a ripening unit where they ripen those bananas, and then they'll trade those bananas in just the local markets or the streets sort of thing. With regards to support to the small farmers, there's a lot of people that are willing to give them a lot of support. Someone like Connie is available to help those farmers. At De Roy, we have 2 workshops per year that we invite all our customers to come and learn on different topics and talks. We've actually got one in the end of September. And we invite all our customers to come free of charge, and we get the experts in the field to come and talk at those to help and train those people up. De Roy also offers the service of going to farmers, seeing how they're doing, what their needs are, and helping assist them in their farming. Because obviously, if the farmer is succeeding, it means that us as the lab will succeed as well. Because a banana plant is a crop that you have to plant every 7 to 10 years in South Africa on average. So if that farmer is succeeding, it means that the return business will obviously come back as well. So from De Roy's perspective, we're also there to aid any questions, any assistance, anything like we can give them.
Thanks, Tam. Brian, you wanted to mention something as well?
Because we are we call it rural KZN, and we found, and I've seen it, that many retail stores are more than happy for the store. They're trying to support local, number one, and they're trying to reduce their carbon footprint. So they actually encourage and have got huge programs from providing the seed, not necessarily sometimes land partnerships, but providing the seed, providing the expertise, and then actually having a program where rural or small scale growers, because it's quite difficult. Like I said earlier, the costs are the same whether you plant 1 hectare or 100 hectares. Per hectare, the cost is the same, but it's easier if you do a lot, because then, it warrants having a 4x4 tractor, or it warrants having certain things where it would be out of reach for a guy when he plants 1 hectare to have just a tractor to plant 1 hectare every 7 years. And like I said, they do mentorship, and they have a special program where the guys grow for them at certain times, and they are proud to present their stuff in the stores. And it's good as a commercial farmer to see that happening.
Love it. I think it's absolutely amazing. I think there are these pockets of success that we don't really highlight, these initiatives that actually work and that just run. And I think it's really great to kind of showcase that and hear about it and share that with others as well. I want to just focus on a bit of the agro-processing if we can. It wasn't listed as part of my questions, but I know that like the way you would get the dry mangoes, you also get dry bananas. Connie, if you can maybe touch on this, just give us a bit of information besides the primary production. Where else can one kind of explore if you want to kind of get into the banana industry, but you don't necessarily want to be a grower yourself?
There is guys that is doing the pulp and also the drying of bananas, but that is on a very small scale, and for certain niche markets. But it is a possibility. I personally think it is something that we need more people into that field.
Thanks, Connie. We're nearing the end of our conversation. And I know that there's probably other areas that we can touch on. We didn't talk that much on pests and diseases. I think we spoke broadly around the challenges when we covered each of the topics or each of the areas that we spoke about. But I'd like to maybe just ask my speakers to share one last comment in terms of like encouraging people to expand with the specific commodity, or just like a general comment on bananas. Thank you. And then we'll wrap up. Tam, because I think I started with you initially. Thanks, Tam.
Bananas are the second most eaten fruit in the world. So there's a huge scope for people to eat bananas. There's a huge demand for bananas. Unfortunately, at this point, South Africa is unable to export to Europe, as I explained earlier, but we export to all our neighboring countries as well. Yes, some bananas do come from our neighboring countries into our markets, but we do send a lot of bananas out to other markets, and there's really a lot of people that we can feed with bananas. It's a very hot and big commodity in South Africa and around the world.
Thanks, Tam. Brian, your final comments. Thanks.
Because I grow them and I've grown them for so long, I'm biased towards them. I believe that the saying, an apple a day keeps the doctor away, is a lie, created by the apple growers. And in fact, it should be a banana a day keeps the doctor away, because it's got more vitamins and minerals than any apple. And for any prospective guys out there wanting to grow this, it's not easy. It grows easily, but it's very satisfying, and it takes continuous. You cannot leave something for a week. There's certain things that need to be done every single day, and no 2 years are the same.
Thank you so much, Brian. I will keep that in mind. I've had a complete change of heart towards bananas. A mad respect for all the growers, for all of you in this space that join me as speakers. So I'll be sure to have a banana a day to keep the doctor away. Connie, your last comments and anything that you'd like to add for all farmers.
I don't think of a banana as a fruit. It's definitely more a food than a fruit. And if you have a banana a day, you might not need other fruit, definitely. I will always advise guys to plant because I've got a passion for bananas. And once the soils and the climate and everything is intact, then we can go ahead and help the guys wherever we can.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Big thanks to my 3 speakers for joining me. Like I said in the beginning, this was like the longest build up to any of my Twitter spaces that I've hosted, and it was very much worth it. And I'm so happy to have been able to connect with all of you. And I hope that all of my listeners enjoyed it as much as I did. Again, thank you for joining me. From my side, Donumdu, have a great rest of the evening, and don't forget to go and have some bananas. I'm actually really wanting one right now after this conversation. Bye, everybody.